This was a example of administratively us making sure that we're smoothing this transition, giving people the opportunities to get right with the law.
President Obama this week defending the 24th time he has unilaterally changed or delayed his health care law without going back to Congress. And many are now questioning whether the president is taking his executive authority too far. Joining us from Utah, Republican Mike Lee, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And here in Washington, California Congressman Javier Becerra, chair of the House Democratic Caucus. Senator Lee, let me start with you. The Obama administration contends that it has broad authority under the tax code to implement laws in ways that will encourage compliance. Given that authority, doesn't President Obama have, whether you like it or not, the ability to keep changing Obamacare?
Look, if that kind of broad regulatory mandate buried somewhere within the Internal Revenue Code can authorize the president to do what he's purporting to do here, then there's almost no limit to his authority. And we have a government of one. We have a super executive and super legislator vested in the President of the United States. That is, of course, not what we have, as any high school civics student can tell you. The President knows this is wrong, and it's not defensible. He's violating the Constitution. He's exercising power that doesn't belong to him. It belongs to the American people.
Congressman Becerra, I got to say, I went back and I read, not the whole 2,000 pages, but I read the key parts of the health care law, and it seems to be very specific when it comes to the employer mandate. Let's put it up on the screen. Effective date, the amendments made by this section, this is in the employer mandate, the amendments made by this section shall apply to months beginning after December 31st, 2013. But, Congressman, as you well know, unilaterally, without coming back to Congress, the president has delayed the employer mandate from 2013 to 14 to 15 and now to 16. What gives him the authority to rewrite what seems to be a very clear law?
Chris, it's the same authority that every president has had to make sure that the laws are administered and executed in a way that helps all Americans. The president is simply providing small businesses with the flexibility they need to be able to start adopting the law. Small businesses support the flexibility, and the president is making sure that we implement this in a way that puts into effect the purpose of the law, which is to give people more health security. So if this were against the Constitution, someone would have sued by now, and the president would have had to stop. The reality is the president has used his executive powers less often than almost every president before him.
This gets to a larger issue, and I want to follow up with you, and then we'll bring in Senator Lee, and that is the president's declaration that he is going to use executive action when Congress won't go along with him. It set up an interesting debate. Take a look.
Pen, and I've got a phone. And I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward.
The president says he has a pen and a cell phone, but the American people have a Constitution, and the Constitution doesn't give him the authority to unilaterally change the law. He's got to come to the Congress to do that.
In fact, Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution gives Congress all legislative powers. Forget the politics for a moment, Congressman Becerra. I would think as a congressman, you would be upset at the idea of any president. And you're right, there are other presidents of the other party who have done it. Any president going around Congress to this extent.
If you were going around Congress to rewrite law, that would be different than trying to use the flexibility you're given by the Congress to execute the law. The president is not trying to rewrite. The president has never said, I'm going to go it alone. The president has said, I'm going to work with Congress. But where Congress decides not to act, remember, this is perhaps the greatest do-nothing Congress we've seen. You have a Republican speaker who said he will not, he will be the brick wall that will not permit the president to act. So the president is trying to implement the laws.
When the law says, the health care law, the employer mandate shall begin after December 31st, 2013, isn't that pretty specific?
It will begin after December 2013. The president said, well, the president said, we'll start it after 2013, but we're going to make sure it works well for small businesses. And the fact that what he's trying to do is make things work. When Congress can't pass bills, when Congress shuts down the government, the president can't just sit there. What he's saying is,
well, yeah,
I won't wait.
That's the way the Constitution's written. The president is supposed to just sit there.
No, is just supposed to sit there? If we have an emergency, the president's just supposed to sit there?
We're not
If we're
talking about an
under national
emergency.
security
We're not talking
attack,
about an emergency with Obamacare.
well, but you never know if something might happen if we just sort
We're
of
not
twiddle
talking
our
about a foreign
thumbs.
threat here, sir.
I would that we would never have a chief executive who would twiddle his thumbs because Congress can't get its act together.
Okay,
and
Senator,
we need to move. We need to move.
Senator Lee, two questions about presidents twiddling their thumbs. If you look at the first 5 years of the recent two-term presidents, and we have a graph on the screen, Obama, in fact, has used executive orders much less often than his predecessors going back to Reagan. And this is the question that Congressman Becerra raised, and I think it's a legitimate question for you, sir. If, as a member of Congress, you feel the president is doing something unconstitutional, you said that, violating the Constitution, why don't you take him to court?
Okay, first of all, as to taking him to court, there are many instances in which a president might violate the Constitution, but in which, for a variety of practical reasons and some constitutional reasons, the courts might not end up exercising jurisdiction over that case. It's very difficult, for example, for someone to challenge in court the president's suspension of the employer mandate. It's difficult to identify the kind of plaintiff that would suffer the kind of injury in fact that's particularized to the plaintiff, so as to be able to establish Article III standing in court.
Can I ask you about?
As to the broader question,
may I just ask you about that, because I know that that's the answer that you guys give. Well, it's hard to establish standing. And I'm not a lawyer, but it would seem to me, couldn't you say as a member of the Senate, hey, we passed this law. It said that the law will go into effect on December 31st, 2013, and the president has ignored our law, so as a member of the Senate, I have standing to protest that.
Yeah, there are some who have suggested that. There are others who have suggested that under the relevant Supreme Court precedent, it might be difficult for members of Congress even to establish standing in those circumstances. But on the broader question, Chris, of the fact that we've had presidents in both parties using executive orders, and that this president hasn't necessarily issued more executive orders than other presidents, I've got responses to that. First, Chris, not all executive orders are equal. You have some executive orders that are plainly authorized by law, in which Congress has delegated the president to make these kinds of decisions. That's really not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here are decisions like those involving the suspension of the employer mandate that is not only not authorized by the statute, it's flatly inconsistent with what the statute says. Secondly, to the extent that presidents in both political parties have strayed from the law and have acted unilaterally outside their delegated authority from Congress and from the Constitution, that's wrong. And the fact that other presidents may have done it in the past doesn't justify it now.
Okay,
we can't stand back and simply ignore this. We can't ignore the fact that we've got a president who is acting as if he's got a government of one simply because he can't always get exactly what